Okay, today my guest is Professor Attila Yaprak. I'll keep my introduction short to maximize our time with him. In the next 30 minutes or so, we'll talk about Attila as a person, Professor Yaprak is a thought leader and an esteemed scholar, and finally is a mentor to many PhD students and junior faculty. For the sake of time, I'll skip many of his accomplishments and give you a very quick snapshot. Professor Yaprak is the Board of Visitors Fellow, the PhD Program Director, and Professor of Marketing and International Business at Wayne State University. He is the AIB historian. Professor Yaprak's areas of expertise are cross-national consumer behavior, international strategic alliances, international marketing strategy, and marketing in emerging economies. He has authored many articles in our top journals, such as JIBS, Journal of Business Research, Management International Review, International Marketing Review, Journal, Journal of World Business, International Business Review, and International Marketing Review, among others. Attila received several research grants from the US Department of Education and the NSF. He also received multiple teaching awards, including the Outstanding Marketing Professor Award from the Academy of Marketing Science. Thank you, Attila, for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
The first question, what did you want to become when you were a child?
I wanted to become a physician first. But I also, on the side, wanted to become a soccer player or a football player and eventually a soccer coach or football coach.
And what changed your mind? What changed your mind from soccer? Okay, I understand the physician, the doctor, every mother wants their son to be a doctor in Turkey, but what changed from the glorious life of soccer to life in academia?
Well, I realized that I'm not as talented as the soccer players whom I was idealizing were. I had some talent, but I just wasn't as talented in football or soccer. And I also discovered, actually, as I was growing up, that I loved teaching. And I come from a family of teachers, actually. Both of my parents were teachers. On my mother's side, my uncle and his wife, my aunt, were teachers. Also again, on my mother's side, my other aunt, my mom's sister, was also a teacher. So, growing up in this teacher family, I sort of developed a feel for what teaching involved. And, later on, when I was in middle school and in high school, just in classes and making presentations when asked, I discovered that I loved that. I very much enjoyed telling a story and embellishing the story with analogies and, bringing insights from, other places and other things. So I thought, maybe I should think about, going into a pathway that will give me the opportunity to teach. So that's how I changed from wanting to become a footballer, to doing something more academic.
In academia, how did you choose international business, international marketing, or how did you choose international, basically, in academia?
Well, actually, it's a very interesting story. I came to the United States to get an undergraduate degree, followed by a master's degree and a doctoral degree, if I qualified for that. There's a funny story behind this. I'll make it very short. Remember, I said that I wanted to become a physician. So in the Turkish entrance examinations, I wrote on the form as my choices all the medical schools, that were listed At that time, there were only 3 or 4 medical schools in Turkey, and we had 6 choices. So when the exam results were announced, I discovered that I could not get into any of the 4 I had listed. I got into other places, but not into the medical schools. So I was, of course, disappointed and was sort of thinking about what to do and so forth. That gave me the opportunity to actually take the study abroad exams offered by the government, with which came a scholarship. And something that had been so disappointing to me, meaning not being able to get into medical school, actually, converted into, became something so positive. And that was the fact that I actually succeeded in these exams. And, out of hundreds, maybe, 1,000 people who took the exam, there were only about 100 selected and only 35 to be sent to the United States. And I was one of the 35 picked. So I arrived in the United States, and as it turned out, I ended up at Indiana University in Bloomington. And at the time, that was the hub of, or one of the hubs of, international business knowledge development, let's say. For example, the gurus of the time, Dick Farmer and Lee Nert, were there, and they were actually raising doctoral student children, who included people who are now IB's greats. Among them were, for example, Lee Radabaugh, who was my cost accounting teacher when I was a sophomore, and Jeff Arpan and David Ricks. You may have run into him at Ohio State. They were all doctoral students at the time. And I was in student government at IU. And I was also on the soccer team, by the way, which, I will get to later. I eventually lived my dream, by playing on the university's soccer team. But in any case, while there, taking courses, both as an undergrad and in the MBA program as an MBA student, I came to love IB. I discovered a love for IB in me. And I thought, well, this is, it looks like this is what I would like to pursue as a career in my life. Of course, this was an extension in one sense. This was an extension of my childhood interest in other cultures, other geographies, other people, other histories, and so on. So the seeds were there for the study of interesting things. But the seeds were sort of nurtured, photosynthesis, so to speak, by being at IU. I later became friends with all of these people whose names I've mentioned, because they too were young people. They were, a little older than me. Nonetheless, at parties and so on. For example, David Ricks and I were in a university organization together. It was a student organization where I was the president and he was the treasurer. Okay. So, this kind of association, and of course they were getting PhDs in IB, or DBAs actually in IB, and they went on to other schools to become IB professors. So there was kind of an osmosis there, that sort of fed an existing seed that was in me, and helped nourish that seed into a plant.
Actually, you're talking about a great group of people, a great cohort, right?
Yes, yes.
Usually PhD programs now have only one or two PhD students in IB or strategy or international marketing, and there's not enough numbers to flourish like that. It is a group of people in a cohort.
Yes, yes. Indeed, just as I'll add this, when I was thinking about doing doctoral work, after all, I had won this government scholarship, and if I qualified, the government would help me during my doctoral study. I asked a number of my professors, including both Dick Farmer and Lee Nert. And I remember to this day sitting across from Lee Nert in his office and asking, I asked him, well, what schools would you recommend? And he recommended a couple, or maybe three. UCLA was one of them, because there was a former IU grad who was a professor there, and so on. But he particularly underscored Georgia State. He said, look, our graduate, Jeff Arpan, went there, and they have been hiring some young people who are good. And of course, he was referring to John Daniels, Dwayne Kujawa, both of whom came from the University of Michigan to Georgia State. And Jeff had gone to Georgia State from Indiana. And Jose de la Torre, who was hired from Harvard to Georgia State. So he said to me, they're putting together a team comprised of young people who are promising in IB. So I would recommend that, you consider Georgia State carefully or very seriously. And I did. I applied to UCLA and Georgia State and, other places, MIT, because Dick Robinson was there. Could not get into MIT, but I got into the other places. Then I decided that I would go to Georgia State, simply because I knew Jeff, and I thought, having heard from Lee Nert about these other people, because in those days, of course, no internet, no websites, nothing,
Yeah.
So then I ended up at Georgia State and actually became a doctoral student of these people, even though John Daniels had left by then, by the time I arrived. But Jose was there, Dwayne Jawa was there, and of course, Jeff was there. So, and as it turned out, I became the graduate assistant of Jose de la Torre. I worked with him, and then he went to INSEAD while I was there. So then I became, I did my dissertation under the mentorship of Jeff Arpan. So, I come from this lineage to IB.
This week, AIB posted Jose de la Torre's interviews, and it's very lively. This is a great interview. It was
I'm
very
glad.
fun.
I'm glad.
Regrets. What is one thing you wish you would have done or done differently in the past?
The one thing that I think I wish I would have done or would have done differently is become more disciplined earlier in my life. I did, as I was growing up, I was a multifaceted person. As I indicated earlier, I played soccer in high school and then at the university. And I took part, I was active in student government, both in high school as well as at IU, at Indiana University, when I was in the undergraduate program. And as I think I mentioned, or here is another thing which I did not yet mention, which is, kind of an interesting part of my life. And that is, I was the lead singer and I played rhythm guitar in a band. Yes. And, actually in two separate bands. And in one band, in my hometown, which was more like the Beatles, I played the rhythm guitar and sang. In the other band, which was in my high school, I was only the singer because we were like Cliff Richard and the Shadows, which were, that was a big, very popular group at the time. And I was Cliff Richard, of the time. So because of all these multifaceted life activities, I wasn't as really well prepared as an academic as I should have done, as I should have been. I should have focused more on my academics, than I actually did. But of course, I realized this during my undergraduate program. And indeed, in getting into the MBA program, I wouldn't say I struggled, but I really couldn't get into some of the MBA programs that I wanted to get into. I did get into IU's MBA program and some others as well. So in the MBA program, I sort of came to my senses and I said, I'm not going to become Cliff Richard and I'm not going to become, Pele or Maradona, and so forth. So I may as well, do the other thing that I love. And that, of course, is teaching and learning and researching and so forth. And of course, the researching part I began developing in the MBA program. In the undergraduate program, of course, I just sort of listened to professors' research stories and so forth. And of course, whatever they assigned us as readings, I would see the research there. But I really didn't sort of develop a love for it until later in life.
Let's talk about research then, since you started mentioning it. How do you explain your research to people who don't read your work regularly? Say you're stranded on the side of the road, you go to locals are curious about you. What do you say to explain the importance of your research and how you make a living in this profession?
Yes, I tell them that I study human behavior. Human behavior either on its own or in organizations. Of course, that would mean, if you carry it by extension, like managerial behavior in business organizations and not in, for example, government organizations. And I tell them that I feel that this is very important because the more we learn about how human beings behave, the more we can understand why certain things happen. For example, what motivates an individual? This is part of human behavior. For example, how can we, what reward systems work in various geographies as compared to other geographies? What are the attitudinal and value profiles of consumers, for instance, that lead them to purchasing various products over other products? For example, why do they prefer buying local compared to buying global brands, or vice versa? Of course, there are lots of people who prefer, who seek out and prefer and chase global brands, even though they may have equally high quality local brands available, So I explain to people that studying behavior, whether we're studying behavior of individuals or of organizations, can help us solve problems that humanity faces. can help us solve problems that organizations face. I gave you examples from the consumer side, but how about on the organization side? For example, why does the firm internationalize? Well, that is something that we need to understand, and we need to understand deeply. Because only then will we be able to explain managerial behavior, managerial decision-making, and so forth.
Looking back at published research or developed literature, what can you say about things that are omitted, things that are neglected, maybe understudied, that going forward for the next 5 to 10 years, especially, these things are going to be more pressing or should gain more salience for
Yes.
investigation?
I would say, especially in IB, deeper or more significant problems of humanity. There should be, in my view, more interest. This, of course, would be sort of advice to younger scholars. My advice to younger scholars would be to search for and to explore problems that would help advance human life.
Are we talking about this approach on responsible management or more ethical approaches to management? Are we talking about these, or are there more?
No, I mean, that of course is part of it, but my focus was more on interdisciplinary work. Of course, this is only normal that every discipline has its own myopia. And of course, we do too. IB has its own myopia. It studies only these kinds of organizations, and maybe these kinds of movements of those organizations. What I'm arguing is that IB should study broader questions that are more interdisciplinary. That would shed light on, for example, the psychology of those movements, the sociology involved in those movements. As an example, one of the human issues that the world or mankind is facing today and will likely face to a greater degree in the future is people movements, immigration, legally or otherwise, and especially the otherwise part. Refugees and, other kinds of people movements. IB should, in my view, focus on these kinds of issues. Another example I'd like to give, which is a little far-fetched, but you have to dream something, right? And begin moving toward that dream. And my dream would be, for example, research work with microbiologists, biologists, environmental scientists, climate scientists, and so forth, so that we can help develop solutions to problems that they are studying. But, I believe, I don't know this, but I would guess, as an educated guess, that they too have their myopias, and they are probably studying these issues, these problems, from their narrow myopic perspectives. And I believe that if we were to blend our knowledge and our methods and our thinking with their knowledge and methods and thinking and so on, that would give us a better synthesis of ways with which we can address these human problems.
Interesting. With Oded Shankar, we're working on actually primates. We are doing some experiments now with a couple of researchers in France. And the idea is, how does it equate? How does it work with the human side versus the primate side, with a lot of things taken out from the context? It's pure perfect theory testing. But the conversation between us and the other researchers are really fascinating, because we talk about research and yet we have completely different universe. These people are coming from different universes. And about interdisciplinary versus multidisciplinary research, I want to tie this thing to the future of IB scholarship, about this changing culture of IB scholarship, this evolution of IB from where it was when you were going through the PhD program in India, and how it evolved to what it is today. What can you say about the progress we're making? Are we losing something along the way? Are we maybe more fruitful now? What is your take on it?
Thank you. I think this is an important question for all of us to address. First of all, let me give you at least my view on the evolution of IB as a field of study. I believe that in the beginning, IB really asked questions that were germane to IB. For example, questions about foreign direct investment, questions about modes of entry, things of that nature. When IB was also studying the environment, which is when, for example, the significance of culture study was underscored. Though the studies of culture at the time were not as sophisticated as, of course, culture study became later in the 1990s, especially, with, of course, Hofstede's work and others like Triandis and, the Triandis crop of people and so on. But IB studied essentially the environment and questions that were specific to IB, such as foreign direct investment and modes of entry initially. Then a new phase began with interest in the functional areas of business. For example, international finance, international marketing, questions of international marketing, came to the fore. Questions about international finance sort of, started brewing in the literature. Questions about international management issue, human resource management and, managerial decision-making and, stuff like that sort of emerged in the literature. And then we moved into an era where one of these functional fields became more dominant. Okay, of course, we see this in the history of, everything that, we study. History is the study of these evolutionary pathways, right? And that field, in our case, that became dominant was international management. And within international management, I would say strategy. So questions about strategy became sort of rose to prominence in the literature. Of course, this was only natural because in the IB environment, organizations were changing. For instance, we were getting increasingly more joint ventures, alliances, different kinds of partnerships, and so on. Collaborative ventures of many different faces. And as a result, the study of these organizational forms, organisms, let's say, because they were really organisms in, of course, a changing environment. The study of these organisms became an urgent need. And IB responded to this with, of course, a burgeoning literature on, strategic alliances and, joint ventures and other collaborative arrangements and so forth. Since then, I would say maybe that was in the 1990s and going into the 2000s. But then, of course, with the arrival of the 2000s, the new millennium, and the profound technological advances, such as the oncoming of the internet and other kinds of information technology, and of course being able to do everything cheaper, and of course with greater facilitation and so forth, even explosive, not just greater, but explosive facilitation. IB scholars' focus changed to explaining IB activity in this new environment. For example, in the international marketing field, which happens subfield, let's say, which happens to be my area of research primarily, we began focusing on international marketing, actually, I would say, international consumer behavior germane topics. For example, we began studying, in other words, each of the subfields was getting microer, we were getting more and more micro, focusing more and more on, microer topics. As an example, in international consumer behavior research, we started focusing on things like, what is the psychological or the socio-psychological makeup of the consumer? How do these positive dispositions and negative dispositions operate in the shaping of the consumer's identity, and so forth. So I would say this is just an example from international marketing. And of course, from all the other subcategories, we can give other examples. But the point I want to make is this. As a result of all of this, IB knowledge, IB scholarship has been growing, yes, but it's growing at a sort of learning curve pace. Rather than growing at an exponential or even a parabolic pace, until we get another big question. When we get a big question, and that could very well be, the kinds of things I was talking about, the interface of, environmental science with IB, the interface of biology with IB, whatever, the interface of psychology and sociology with IB, and so forth. If that interface were to give birth to the next big question in IB, or big questions in IB, then we will see quantum leap kinds of, the curve will go from being like this to, another jump. And of course, eventually it will again go into a learning curve until the yet another big question arrives, So this is the way I see IB's current, state of the union, so to speak, and what I foresee for its future.
Oh, you're right. I mean, at one point, and some of the guests talking in these interviews, they talk very specifically about functional areas, and they are very much vested in these functional areas. And then some people are very cautious in talking about the next phase of globalized firm or nationalized economies, ideologies, perspectives. People are very cautious, and there's no consensus on what that next big thing is, the next big wave, at least, is. So I want to ask you.
And there shouldn't be. Incidentally, I like the fact that there is no consensus, because the next big question will emerge. It's important for all of us as IB scholars to be at the forefront, but studying, different things. As long as these different things are inspired by, these different questions that we are studying are inspired by helping solve human problems.
Interesting. I want to talk about the advice mentoring part a little bit. What was the best advice you received when you were going through the PhD program? You mentioned a couple of giants in the field, early version of the field. What was the best advice you received from them?
I would say that the best advice I received from them, incidentally, I'm not sure it's the best advice, but a good advice I received from them was that in academic life, research and teaching go together. Of course, that's something I had already realized, throughout my own education. But of course, they always said, they go together, but research is what counts, from a practical perspective. Don't you make the mistake of, doing some dreamy things, like I want to help teach people, and so on. Focus on your research, but research and teaching feed off of each other, and they feed each other. Of course, I had realized this sort of, in sophomoric, terms when I was in the program. And of course, I developed that notion later on as my personal professional life grew. Nonetheless, to this day, I believe that it is important for an academic person to never leave research, even in retirement. Of course, in retirement, you'll do certain kinds of research, and maybe you'll write thought pieces, and so on, rather than actually doing empirical research as such. Nonetheless, it is important to do it. It is important to explore questions and to extend and to expand current knowledge. But what some academics, I think, fall into the trap of, which I would advise against, is the fact that, this can sort of become they become obsessed with this, meaning by this, I mean, they become obsessed with publishing only, and I think, yes, one should pursue publishing, but one should also pursue a more balanced approach to one's professional life, as one should pursue a more balanced approach to one's personal life. For instance, it's important for me to have a balanced personal life. My family is very important for me. My wife, who's also a professor like you, we have always supported each other's career development, even though it was very hard at times. For example, my wife, at one point in her career, became a program director at the National Science Foundation during the Obama administration, and lived in Washington, D.C. while I was living in Ann Arbor, Michigan, with our children. But, this was, of course, I supported this 150% because, this was a wonderful opportunity for her professional growth, and so forth. And of course, she supported, my various professional pathway activities along the way. And, we raised 3 children, and I think this is really one of our biggest life accomplishments. It is for both of us, in my opinion.
Interesting. I want to ask you, I normally ask people about what's the advice for the junior faculty, the PhD students, but I want to ask you something about the mid-career faculty, people who have tenure, post-tenure. What's the advice in your experience? What's the advice that you would give to post-tenure people, mid-career, nearing the...
The advice I would give is as follows. First, try different kinds of things that you were unable to do when you were striving to get tenure. When, of course, your, the greatest proportion of your focus was on research and getting published, and of course, earning the honor of tenure. So post-tenure, you should try different things. Yes, that is true, but never ever leave research. You may slow down a little bit. It's only natural. We're all human beings, and but don't ever let go. Never ever let go of your interest in exploration. Never ever let go of your interest in raising graduate student children. Continue to raise children. And of course, the children being your graduate students. Impact their lives in positive ways. Inspire in them the same kind of passion that you have for exploration and for research, so that they too will continue exploring and expanding and extending, pushing the frontiers of knowledge or any other, phenomenon that they are passionate about.
Perfect. Thank you. Now, for the sake of time, last question. What's the question that I should have asked you but haven't?
I would say it's like, what do I consider to be my life's story? What do I consider my life's, shall we say, most significant accomplishment? And my answer to that, yes, my answer to that would be pursuing what I love and giving love. I have, I think, throughout my life, injected love in practically everything I've done. I've injected love into my research projects. I've injected love into my teaching. I've injected and continue to do so. I've injected love into raising my doctoral student children, whether I was their mentor or served on their committees or helped them develop even without serving on their committees. And I've, of course, injected love into my family and continue to do so. And I would consider really, maybe the following would be a nice way to summarize this. And that would be the pursuit of a balanced life filled with love. I think that's the best description I can give it.
Perfect. Thank you so much for this very interesting interview. I learned a lot. I'm sure the audience will agree with me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, Ilgaz. And of course, I look forward to seeing you at various conferences and so on. And good luck to you and your wife in your careers.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.